Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. We're here to talk about the fair tax proposal and what our options are. We've gone down these paths before. The chaos and the careening from crisis to crisis that the state has now unfortunately become accustomed to is something that we have seen before and we don't necessarily want to repeat again. The voters made it very, very clear after the last election that they did not want the chaos and the cuts and the instability that we've just experienced. And so we're committed to making sure that when we turn this state around, that we do it in the most fair, balanced way that's possible. But we're still operating off people who are opposed to this. Our opposition is operating on the idea that cuts are the way to go. So because we've seen what the voters said at the polls, when the voters said that at the polls last time, and we're coming here now to try to turn this ship around, you don't need to look any further than how many students fled Illinois and do not go to universities here in this state, the damage we did to our social services and safety nets, and the instability that affected almost every single business across the state over the last 4 years. There are three options. We can make drastic cuts across the board. We can stop funding to schools and public safety and universities and social services, and stopping and slashing funding to schools will do nothing but raise property taxes. We can raise income taxes by 20% on everybody, the middle class, everybody. That would hit every single person in the state that pays taxes right now. Or we can work on implementing a fair income tax that only raises taxes on 3% of the folks. None of these things are easy, but we've seen what the impact was when we operated under the first two ideas. So saying no to a fair tax right now is literally saying no to working families. It's saying no to school children. It's saying no to our social services safety net. It's saying no to the people that we came here to protect the most. I don't think that's the path forward, and I have my colleagues with me now, and we're going to flesh this out a little bit more, and later we'll be ready for questions.
Thank you. My name is Representative Mike Zalewski. I serve as chairperson of the House Revenue and Finance Committee. After years of Illinois Republican Party leadership, Illinois faces a choice. We can move toward fairness and stability in our budget, or we can continue down the path of destruction and destructive cuts to those who need services most. Without fair tax reforms, we face a 15% across-the-board cut simply to balance the budget and meet our obligations. What does that mean in real terms? Well, it means this. 17,000 seniors would lose access to Meals on Wheels. 2,300 women would be denied access to life-saving breast cancer screenings and treatment. More than 13,000 families would be kicked off the early intervention program, and nearly 20,000 students would lose their MAP grants, accelerating the outmigration of our brightest students. Their future success, innovation, and job creation needs to take place in Illinois. We can't afford that outmigration above all. On the other hand, if we implement a fair tax, if we give the voters a choice to make our tax system modern and fair, it will restore fiscal stability, allow us to pay off the Illinois Republican Party's old bills, and invest in critical resources like schools and healthcare, all while providing tax relief to 97% of Illinois taxpayers. I strongly support the governor's push for a fair tax in Illinois. I'm happy to answer your questions, but for now, I'm going to turn it over to Leader Don Harmon. Oh, Senator Manar, I apologize.
Thank you, Representative. Senator Andy Manar, represent the 48th District and chair the Appropriations 2 Committee in the State Senate. I want to start here. It's been said multiple times, but it should be said again. It's been, I'll get my number right, it's been 36 days since Governor Pritzker appeared before a joint session of the legislature, and he delivered for us a budget that was intended to address the state's short-term needs and then build for a long-term approach. On that day, the governor rightfully so put forward three choices that we can make as policymakers, and they've been outlined by the previous two speakers, and I'm going to outline them one more time. We can go back to what we've been doing that was the choice made by the previous governor by telling the people of the state that we can cut our way into a balanced budget proposal. And so the governor appropriately outlined 36 days ago that that would require 15% reductions for every program in state government. The second choice is we can raise taxes on everyone, and that would equate to a 20% income tax increase on every taxpayer in the state. The third choice that the governor laid out is what we've been working on and what we're here to support today, and that is making sure that those that have been doing well under the economy in the state need to step up and pay their fair share to help state government and to help our state move forward. As the chair of the Appropriations Committee, I've been watching what opponents of the fair tax plan and what Republicans that we serve with have been saying to not just the media but the people around the state, and they've been painting a picture of a budget that can be balanced without the fair tax plan. So I challenge not just Republicans but opponents to the governor's plan to produce that budget. I think they're obligated to do it. If they believe that the budget can be balanced through cuts, there's a pretty simple methodology as a legislature. Get a budget drafted, file that budget in the House and the Senate, and show the people of the state what it looks like, and then we can have that debate. We would welcome that debate as lawmakers. And I would say this, as the chair of the committee in the Senate, I would welcome that debate in the Senate Appropriations Committee. There's three choices for us moving forward. And I believe the governor has laid out an appropriate plan for the state of Illinois. And if anyone believes that a 15% across the board reduction to state spending is the appropriate way to move forward, I would challenge them to file that budget in the House and the Senate so we can make that part of the debate moving forward. Leader Harmon.
Thank you, Senator. Don Harmon. I represent the 39th Legislative District in the State Senate, a Democrat from Oak Park. My colleagues have been very clear, as Governor Pritzker was when he laid out the options. We have to deal with the $3.2 billion structural budget deficit that was cemented in place under Governor Rauner. The first two options, which we've talked about, deep draconian cuts to critical government services or an across-the-board income tax increase of at least 20% on everyone, have no support, not with the public and not with our colleagues in the General Assembly. Even the harshest critics of the fair tax plan won't come out and say they're for one of the other two options. However, there is broad public support for the fair tax. Recent polling puts the support in the mid-60%, which is critically important because in order to enact this, we in the General Assembly have to adopt a resolution putting a question on the ballot and asking the voters to support an amendment to the Constitution that would do away with the flat tax and allow us to join most every other state with an income tax and adopt a fair tax, where lower rates would apply to lower income levels and higher rates apply to higher income levels. Over the next several weeks, we're going to begin that process in the General Assembly of moving that resolution through both chambers to put that question before the voters in the 2020 election cycle. I am confident, as I was 2 years ago and 4 years ago and 6 years ago, that the voters will support that. It's terrific to have a governor who understands the importance and is willing to be a cheerleader for this so that we in the General Assembly have the support from the executive branch, and I'm looking forward to working with my colleagues in the House and the Senate to put that question before the voters and to ask for their support. Are we opening it up for questions at this point?
Yeah.
You guys have been in power has suggested that the governor's projections might be, growth projections might be a little too rosy. Do you really think you're going to be able to get as much revenue as being suggested?
I'm thrilled that the critics of the plan are finally acknowledging that we actually have a revenue issue. Now, we cannot cut our way out of this. I think the projections are as credible as they can be, and we're looking into it now. We want to make sure that we support that, but I've not seen any credible complaints that are any different than the credibility of the governor's projections.
Democrats have had the legislature for like 25-something years. Why should taxpayers trust what critics are calling a blank check?
It's really hard to vote to raise income taxes, no matter what the circumstances. How many times have we done it in the last 25 years? Twice. It's a really difficult thing to do. It's not going to be any easier with a fair tax authorized in the Constitution. It's still going to be really difficult. And I just think that the argument is a bit of a head fake. The critics want to protect multimillionaires who worry that their taxes might go up. This would allow us to protect the middle class. Their concern for the middle class, to my mind, is feigned.
talking with taxpayers in general, I mean, the people I run into, they're not billionaires, millionaires, or whatever, and they hear this proposal, they hear any tax increase proposal, gas tax, bag tax, whatever it may be, all of them says we're the most taxed state in the country. And they say, I don't trust these guys in Springfield to raise my taxes and spend it appropriately. What do you guys say?
We know that there is a lot of cynicism that is embedded in our political process. We absolutely know that. But we also know the power of facts and data. And when we talk about taxes without talking about what taxes pay for, which is why you can have a wide disconnect, because most people will say, no, I don't want my taxes to go up, which is why this plan calls for 97% of people in Illinois' taxes not to go up. We do know what we've seen. We know what happened when 7 universities were downgraded in one day. We know what it was like to watch human services across the state be obliterated. We know the impact that comes when you cut critical services and then the effect that that has on the budget down the line. None of us are going to get out. We're not going to be able to move out of this and not pay for the incredible damage that was done over the last 4 years. Every problem we had was cemented and made worse. So it is absolutely critical that we have a real conversation that's based on real numbers and real people's lives, because then we can talk about what the budget really is, which is a moral document. Don't tell me what you believe in. Show me what you believe in. So if there's a no to this, then present the budget that does that. And what we do know is that those very same voters don't want that.
Are you at all afraid of message muddling? I mean, like, it's hard enough for voters to understand the budget process here in Springfield. I mean, I'm sure not very many people understand that a budget happens, you know, the 1st of July, et cetera, et cetera. You know, we wouldn't even have the extra revenue from a graduated income tax until, you know, late 2020, possibly 2021. I mean, are you afraid that the message, there's just a lot of mixed messages getting sent out from the governor's office, from ideas, or, you know, the Think Big Illinois, and from other proponents, and, you know, that voters will be angry, you know, later this year upon realizing that, you know, I don't know.
Yes, yes.
Thanks.
Yes. Yes, there's a lot to be worried about. There's a lot to be concerned about. I'll tell you what I'm most afraid of. I'm most afraid of continuing the spiral of students who don't choose to stay home and rebuild our economy. I'm most afraid of the people who fall through the cracks and have no one there to support what happens when we need to take care of our most vulnerable populations. I'm most afraid of continuing to do the exact same things we've done and expecting any different results. What we did over the last 4 years destroyed the state. And what we need to do now is rebuild. And yes, we live in the 21st century, and most people will only listen to folks that confirm their own opinions about things. We recognize that our media outlets and all those things are set up and designed in a way where there's so many voices, so many different messages, and so many things that are targeted to so many different people that it is really hard to cut through the din. So the only thing that we can do here is the best we can with the most reliable data we have to help the most people we can every way we can. And so a plan that says 97% of the people across this state will have their taxes stay the same or be lowered is very different than saying, I don't care whether your kid has, whether you need a MAP grant. And I don't care whether you have someone who's developmentally disabled and there's waiting lists now and they can't find housing for that. And we don't care, we cannot continue down that exact same path. So if the question is, are we worried that people will be angry? What people were angry for, they actually did at the polls last November. And they said no to that. And they voted for this. So at this point, I think if we could talk more about what taxes pay for and how we all have a role in this, we're ready to stand with any lawmaker, any person that has a credible plan to turn this state forward. But the single best thing we can do is to introduce stability back into this government. We have not had it for years. And I'm more afraid of that than I'm more afraid of staying on the same path than I am about taking a chance and making a strong step towards the future of the state of Illinois. That is where I see hope. What I see before, we just can't keep doing.
Or even Plan B going into the next fiscal year, because this isn't going to be implemented until 2021, the fiscal year 2021. So I mean, how do we bridge that gap between then, and what if this doesn't What if the voters reject this?
That's the test we have going forward all the time. But the governor did lay out in his budget address, as Senator Manar said 36 days ago, this is a bridge. This is a bridge year. We're not going to be able to fix decades of problems in 1 year. We need everybody to come to the table to try to figure out how to make this work and to do it together. That's the ideal situation. The plan B really is the destruction of state government. And in that world, people really need to understand what the choices are. We have 3 choices, and I have not yet heard another option that would satisfy what it is we need to accomplish in the state and do the critical services we have promised our constituents in this state without that.
Besides the effort that's been spent on this 97 versus 3% idea, what assurance do voters have that these are the rates that are what are going to come before them if this thing goes forward?
Well, the flip side of your question is if we were to put an amendment on the ballot that was silent on rates, we think, I won't speak for everyone, but I think the general sentiment is then the opponents of this idea would simply define it for us and would say, your rates X will go up exponentially, your rates Y will go up exponentially too. You know, you have to give the governor credit for this. He's been, the knock on Springfield politics in the last 10 years has been, we're not transparent, we do things last minute, we do things under the cover of night. The governor put this in his budget in mid-February. He laid out a very transparent process for how he wanted this to all go down. He'd like to see the rates conversation happen with the amendment conversation so that everyone is on the same page. And if people know what they're going in to vote for in November of 2020 and know how it's going to affect their pocketbook, we think that's a good conversation for us to be having. We think it's a transparent conversation for us to be having.
What do you guys say to the businesses, the small S-corps, pass-throughs that'll be hit by this?
Go ahead.
Because I think what the governor's proposal is anybody over 200,000 would see 7% or 7+ or something like that.
No, any taxpayer under $250,000 would see tax relief under this plan. Don't forget 2 months ago when we were fighting over the minimum wage, opponents of the bill characterized all of those small businesses and pass-throughs and sole proprietors as barely earning enough to get by. If it's the same people today, they'll all get a tax cut. The opponents seem to be changing the definition of small businesses from one fight to another. In my view, most small businesses would get a tax break under Governor Pritzker's proposal.
What about those businesses that, are manufacturers who have a lot of inventory, they may have 1.5 million on the books, but they're not actually taking that home in income. That's employees,
then they're not paying taxes on it. That's my whole point. This plan taxes owners when they take the money out of the company and put it in their pockets. And for all these hardworking small businesses who are getting by, and some years they're taking 30,000, some years they're taking 60,000, some years they might be taking 120,000, they're all going to get a tax break. This is a pro-small business bill. And you can just ask all the folks that were arguing against the minimum wage, how suddenly their universe of people have changed so dramatically in their income profile.
Earlier this week, we always talk about voters maybe having opposition to this, of course, they mentioned that already, but members of the Senate GOP this week proposed an amendment to make, or they had a press conference proposing an amendment to make it more difficult to raise taxes. I think there was like 2/3 votes they want to have, something like that. Do you see that as a potential roadblock as well as voters, or what's kind of your response to something like that?
So I should have said this in my remarks, but when our colleagues who we all respect were here in this room, it would be nice to help move this conversation forward by having them put a plan forward for the same purposes as what the governor laid out 36 days ago. What the GOP put forward is not a plan to solve the state's problems. It's rhetoric. The opponents are using, clever tactics, which we see all the time in this building, to try to punch holes in something that they oppose for their own specific reasons. What we haven't heard from any opponents is a plan to solve the problems that have been plaguing the state for decades. And the governor, to his credit, owned it on day one, actually before day one. And when he put his first budget proposal on the table, he appropriately said there are 3 choices. There are 3 choices. So when the GOP was in this room, Laced into their words were this implication that we can balance the budget by doing this, and that they would support that with their votes when it was called on the Senate floor. So again, I would challenge them. Let's put proposals aside that are intended to play politics with what the governor has put forward from opponents. And let's have a conversation about how to solve the problems of the state. We think the governor's plan does that. If they believe that we can cut 15% at least throughout the budget, and that's something that they can support and put their votes on, then let's see it. And let's call it for a vote, and let's see where they're at. We're interested in solving problems. I would chalk that press conference up to politics.
I want to add one thing on that. And when they came down here, they talked about protecting the middle class. I'd like you to ask them the hard questions. How is it any easier in a world where the fair tax is permitted, is it for us to raise taxes on middle-class families? Their real concern is that they think it would be easier to raise taxes on their wealthy supporters who make more than $1 million. That's still going to be difficult, but don't let them pretend that they are down here protecting middle-class families, because even with the fair tax in place, it's not going to be any easier for the General Assembly to raise taxes on those families.
You have three options there. One's, of course, the fair tax. One's drastic cuts. One's raising taxes on everybody. Isn't there, I mean, you know, people can chew bubblegum and walk at the same time, right? Can't there be cuts and revenue increases at the same time? I mean, the governor's proposing
that.
Yeah, he's proposing 1.2, 1.1 billion in new tax revenue, not income taxes, but where are the cuts?
Governor's budget includes cuts.
Yeah,
sure. We just sat through 3 hours of hearings today, and 3.5, maybe I might be off a little bit, yesterday. The House is having appropriations hearings. We're sifting through that now. The governor put forward a budget that is, as Senator Hutchinson said, a bridge to more permanent, stable operations for the state of Illinois. So the governor isn't proposing a budget that is balanced simply through different revenue proposals. There are cuts. If you heard the testimony on DCFS, I was critical of the proposal because I didn't think it did enough for solving the agency's problems. So there's moving parts, many moving parts to what the governor's proposed, and I think he's appropriately identified limited places where cuts can be made in state government without impacting the services that we all expect to fund and that our constituents expect to fund. So the idea that again, I want to go back to, if there are cuts to be made that our colleagues on the other side of the aisle believe are appropriate, put them on the table. Put your votes behind them. If you think this can be done by cuts only, option number one that the governor laid out 36 days ago, there's 2 months left in session. That's plenty of time to draft a budget, get it drafted, file it. Let's have a debate on it, and let's see where people fall when votes are taken. Governor's put forward a budget that reduces spending in some places, raises revenue. We're debating those things right now. We'll bring it to balance, and then we need long-term stability, which is what this proposal is about.
So we need to get out of the room here. One more question?
So say, I want to touch on that bridge. So say sports betting, legal marijuana, the bag tax, any one of these kind of new taxes happens to fall through. Will this plan or any of these plans that you're talking about have to be adjusted to make up for that revenue shortfall?
Sure. Yeah, and any proposal that the governor has put forward is going to require 30 votes in the Senate and 60 votes in the House, and if they meet those vote thresholds, they're going to pass. If they don't, they're going to fail. And so that means budget adjustments will have to be made. That's what we're doing right now, and the governor's working to build consensus for those proposals. If there is consensus, that will be incorporated. If not, of course, there will have to be adjustments made on the spending side.
But it doesn't mean that the rates for the fair tax would have to be changed in the next fiscal year. It's not a change there. So thank you all very much. Appreciate you being here.
Our officers.
Jeff Berkowitz, thanks for joining us on the Illinois Channel. We're going to take a bit of an in-depth look at the run for the mayor of Chicago. I think what they care about are the issues we're talking about. What are you going to do about the schools? What are you going to do about fixing the financial situation of the city? And what are you going to do about the level of crime and ensuring that we have safe neighborhoods? Would I be right on that?
Yes.
The Illinois Channel, keeping you connected to your state, your issues, your home.